Welcome to the Bureau. Today we have a discussion that could literally shape Canada's future. Yesterday we learned that many Canadian premiers that traveled down to Washington, along with the Prime Minister's right-hand man, Minister Dominic LeBlanc, claimed they had only first realized the full extent of how serious the US government is about Canada's role as a production and export hub for fentanyl, and how this relates to President Trump's requests of Canada's government. So while others in Canada have refused to even name Beijing in connection to fentanyl and organized crime, Vancouver area Mayor Brad West has been sounding the alarm for years. He's a highly respected leader in British Columbia. He's been calling out China's role for years in what he describes as the blood trade. As I reported for the Bureau in 2023, when the Biden administration needed a trusted Canadian partner to tackle this crisis, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, reached out specifically to Mayor West. So we'll speak more about that. I just want to add that, as Canada's journalist subject matter expert on these issues, I've said before, Mayor West would have made an excellent fentanyl czar because the U.S. trusts him. And I believe he understands the deep structural changes needed in Canada's laws to fight fentanyl. That's my own view. We'll hear what Mayor West has to say, but I just want to start with a quote that he gave to my great former colleague at the Vancouver Province, columnist Mike Smith, in 2019. This was before my work had led to BC's anti-money laundering inquiry. So Mayor West said, "We've had thousands of people die from fentanyl while the drug dealers made billions. Their blood money was washed clean in our real estate market, pricing people out of their homes in their own communities." Mayor West continued to say, "It's systemic corruption and systemic failure. You need a public inquiry to determine how it happened, why it happened, and how to prevent it from happening again." People, that was 2019, Mayor West on the record. So let's start. Mayor West, you're up early in British Columbia today. Thank you for this. It's crucial times for Canada. So let me start with this. How real is Canada's fentanyl problem? Is the US government by any chance exaggerating Canada's role? And number two, would you have been willing to take on the role as Canada's fentanyl czar?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Sam. It's a real honor for me to be able to speak to you about this because I think that this is one of the most singularly important things facing our country. And in fact, that's something I said back in November of 2018. Cast your mind back to that time. And I said in one of my first major public speeches about this topic that this was one of the biggest challenges facing our country. And it was important that it be the number one priority for government. The reality is that Canada has a very serious problem with fentanyl, and it's getting worse, not better. I took the time to look at some of my old quotes over the years, sounding the alarm. I almost wish we could go back to that period of time. Because it seems like a more innocent time than we're in now. This has not stopped. It's only grown. And the evidence of that is all around us. The American interest in having Canada address this, I think, is really the chickens coming home to roost. I think there have been many attempts by U.S. administrations, both Democratic and Republican, to implore Canada to address the inadequacies in our laws, the fragmented investigations that happen, and really, and most importantly, I think, our seemingly inability to achieve any convictions of any seriousness as it relates to fentanyl. So, I know a lot of people are discovering this issue just now. And there does seem to be this kind of knee-jerk defense, particularly from the Ottawa establishment, if I can describe them that way, says, no, we don't have a problem. This is just Donald Trump being Donald Trump. Regardless of anyone's particular dislike of Donald Trump or his policies. Canada has a serious, serious fentanyl problem. It has killed tens of thousands of our fellow citizens. It has led to our country becoming a safe haven for transnational organized crime. It has cascaded into our housing market and infected many, many segments of our society. So you know whose interest it is to address this? Ours. It's our interest. It's our country and our citizens who will benefit from a much more serious approach to this challenge. And so I hope this is a turning point. I hope that this very serious issue doesn't get obscured because of individuals' particular like or dislike of the current US president, because ultimately it is our country and our citizens who have paid the price for government's inaction and worse over the last decade. And the one thing I have learned about fentanyl is it will not stop. And neither will these transnational criminal organizations. They won't stop, Sam, unless they are confronted and ultimately defeated. And so that is our task. With respect to the fentanyls, our role, look, I love being mayor of Port Coquitlam. It's my hometown. I consider it to be the greatest honor of my life, next to being a dad, to get to serve my community in that capacity. But I am so passionate about this issue and believe it is so important to the future of our country and the future of my kids and their kids, that I would have stepped away from my role as mayor of Port Coquitlam to serve in that capacity if I had been asked, because I believe it requires a certain seriousness and a approach that follows the evidence and then follows through. And that didn't come to pass, and that's okay. But I will continue to be a very strong, outspoken voice on this issue because I think it is so important to the future of this country.
Okay, let's circle back later to what you think about, what a fentanyl czar needs to do, maybe how deep they need to go, what their capacity is in terms of bringing people together. But that brings me to Antony Blinken, the former Secretary of State, reaching out to you of every politician in Canada. And I know that, when I talked to you last, there were certain things you could share at a high level. And the thing that I found stunning and yet a confirmation of my work with sources was you indicated that Secretary of State Blinken shared the opinion that the US government at a state level believes Beijing at some level is intentionally involved in the fentanyl trade. Is that right? And what can you tell North Americans that are going to watch this podcast about what Secretary of State Blinken shared with you in terms of US government concerns broadly of fentanyl and Canada's role in it?
Yeah, I think that the Secretary of State reached out to me because of my track record on the issue, and that my interest in this comes from a genuine place. I think I've developed a level of credibility, and I think they trusted me because of that. So we had a meeting that lasted well over an hour. And as I shared, he was incredibly candid and very serious. And I think I want to underscore that the level of seriousness of this discussion. He was very serious about the threat that fentanyl poses to North America. And he confirmed, as I told you, the connection between the Chinese Communist Party, the triads, the drug cartels of Mexico and South America, and the many agendas that are being served through that connection, including the Chinese Communist Party's interest in destabilizing North American society. And I think by any measure, fentanyl has done that. It has killed tens of thousands of people more in North America. It has destabilized our society. It has led to a level of lawlessness as organized crime groups and everything that's associated with them take hold and use this as a base of operations. So from a Chinese Communist Party perspective that's interested in defeating Western society and North America, maybe not through a direct conflict, but achieving superiority to North America, this has been a very significant step towards that. You just see that the chaos it has unleashed. And he was very clear that the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government, which is in command and control of that country and its economy, could, if it so desired, stop the flow of fentanyl precursors into North America and into Canada specifically, but they have no interest in doing that. So that connection, which you have reported on extensively, is something that was confirmed at the highest levels of the U.S. government. He also made the connection to money laundering, and he specifically named Canada and in our country's inability to successfully prosecute some of the most egregious cases. We specifically discussed Silver International. We specifically talked about the support elements that are required to facilitate fentanyl trafficking on an industrial scale. And that's what we have in our country. We have fentanyl trafficking on an industrial scale. So think about everything that's required as a foundation to facilitate that. The banking system, business fronts, properties, all the different touch points, and the fact that that has been successfully achieved by these organizations in Canada. He, of course, shared that President Biden had tasked him with building a global coalition and a response to all of this. And he shared that it was the assessment of the US government that Canada was a very concerning weak link and had become an increasingly attractive place to operate out of for transnational criminal organizations because our laws are deficient, investigations are hamstrung, convictions are rare. And, as he said that, I couldn't help but think of the e-pirate investigation. Here we have what is heralded as, the investigation and the prosecution that is going to set the standard across our country and send a message that you will not engage in this level of criminality and get away with it. That was the expectation that was set. And what happens? It collapses. And no consequences. None of the individuals involved in probably one of the most abhorrent cases of money laundering have ever seen the inside of a jail cell. And we know where that money came from. So we talked about that. He specifically noted the lack of a RICO style law in Canada, which in the United States, of course, has been used successfully to take down large portions of the mafia, particularly in New York. One of the things that was incredibly striking to me, and this is one that I haven't spoken about before, and it sticks with me, and I think a lot about it. He expressed his concern that American intelligence and law enforcement agencies were sharing a lack of confidence in Canada's ability to act on evidence provided by the Americans. And the question is why? Why do they have that lack of confidence? And it gets to, I think, the second piece, which I've had reflected to me by a number of my American contacts. They express a sort of shock and disbelief that individuals who are known to be major players in criminal organizations have so much access to Canada's political establishment. And I think, those things hand in hand start to paint the picture of why we have some of the challenges that we do.
Okay, let me stop you for a second, because that, in my business, that's an explosive, it's not an allegation. You're sharing what you've been told, an explosive headline. So I wrote just the other day that people within Canadian policing circles were so concerned with where we are as a country. They came to me and went on the record and said, U.S. law enforcement and intelligence has expressed concern and stopped sharing sensitive intelligence because they are so concerned that Canada cannot prosecute the highest levels of Asian organized crime involved in fentanyl. And they are concerned about the connectivity of Canadian politicians to suspects in Asian organized crime. If my ears are telling me the truth, this is what you're hearing as well.
That is absolutely what I have heard. And, the evidence of this is not particularly hidden. It's not as though we have, elected officials necessarily who are having clandestine meetings with these individuals. There are photos all over the place of individuals who are very significant players in drug trafficking and money laundering, and their associates who are at political fundraisers, who are at political events, who seem to have access to the, as I call it, the political establishment. And so that may not be, directly to the prime minister or the premier or any other elected official, but certainly to the apparatus that surrounds our elected officials. And you would hope that there would be a real strong line between our political leadership and those individuals who are engaged in that level of criminality. But that line seems to be very blurred. And I think it is, in some measure, a result of a misguided view by some elected officials that in order to win the votes of certain communities in this country, that they have to that they engage with these individuals who present themselves as community leaders or the such, but who are in fact incredibly bad actors. And this gets to the overlapping role specifically of the Chinese Communist Party and the United Front. So there is a lot there, but the fact that our American partners are sharing their very serious concerns, and that it's at a level to the point where they no longer feel that they can provide evidence because they don't trust and don't have confidence in our ability to act on that evidence, is, as I said, stunning to me. And this is something that I have carried with me since that meeting. And you look at some of the botched investigations, or the fact that some of these people who are high level people, and everyone knows what they're up to. Everyone knows, but they seem untouchable. And I find myself asking the question why a lot these days, Sam.
Yeah, I want to ask you a personal question about that, but let me track back a bit. Not all the viewers will know what Silver International refers to. So this was the underground bank that was in fact operating in broad daylight in a Vancouver area Richmond municipality office tower. I believe it was the third floor, just down the hall from where a former Liberal MP held his law office. It had bulletproof see-through glass storefront, and it was responsible, as the US government, came to our RCMP and shared eventually in this failed investigation. It was responsible, as one of a number of underground banks in Vancouver. It was responsible for some billions, because it was such a large, this shop, Silver International, run by the highest levels of international Asian organized crime, was responsible for billions in money laundering through BC casinos, real estate, many other things tied to that, as I know. And so it involved what's called Sam Gore, or the company, an international network of the highest level triads that is directed from Toronto, Ontario. And so, as my US government sources say, yes, the DEA and other US Homeland Security, etc., very concerned that Sam Gore and the company are set up in Vancouver and Toronto, laundering billions upon billions upon billions through our city real estate. We're talking about developments, towers, homes, through our banks, billions, 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 through our casinos, legal and illegal underground casinos, which host, as I've reported, Canadian politicians. So that's that. I can what I'm doing here is, I didn't know that you had the level of information that the US Secretary of State in a Democratic administration was so deeply aware of, Vancouver's role with this highest level underground bank. And the RICO Act, he's telling you Canada needs this anti-racketeering law. So I'll get into what, a fentanyl czar in Canada can and should do. But personally speaking, I think what I just heard from you is, it's troubling as a Canadian leader to get this level of download of information, which you got, and carry it around with you. And then you start to wonder why things aren't happening in Ottawa. Maybe I'm transposing the way I feel. It was troubling for the past number of years as an investigative reporter that people that risked their careers reached out to me and shared the same sort of information. Am I right that you personally feel that weight inside yourself?
Yeah, it is it's a heavy thing to carry, and I've wrestled with, how do I continue to push for change? What do I do with this? Um, you know, um, let's be real for a minute. I mean, as the mayor of a city of 65,000 people, it certainly felt um, somewhat above my pay grade to be asked to meet with the secretary in the first instance. I mean, the fact that I was asked to have this meeting out of the hundreds of thousands of elected officials that are in our country. Um, that said something to me. So I have felt like I have a responsibility to do something with this, and I have tried at every opportunity to push for change, to be as candid and as clear and direct as I can be, to work in a way that is not partisan at all, but is about what is in the best interest of our country and our citizens, and just really focus on the issue, and try and push for, I think, the very common sense sort of changes that need to happen in our country. And I mean, I might also offer that this hasn't come without a level of risk and consequence. I know that I have been targeted by those who don't want to see any change, who want to have things continue in the way that they have been going. And so, at times that can represent a safety or security risk to me and my family. It's been all sorts of political nonsense as well. But at the end of the day, I feel like I was entrusted with something that is very significant. And it's not something that I can just kind of sweep under the rug and carry on. If I did that, I would not be doing my duty as an elected official. I take really seriously that oath that I swore when I was elected mayor to serve the interests of the people of Port Coquitlam. And I know that this is an issue that isn't about filling potholes and making sure our parks are clean and we have good rec centers. Though I'll state for the record that we do all of that. But this is so consequential to the future of the people of Port Coquitlam and the entire country that I have felt obligated to do my part. So that's what I have been trying to do.
Okay, in terms of a fentanyl czar, first of all, you have said if called, you would help in some way, even take up such a role. What could that position do in terms of a lead in Canada if Ottawa is now saying that they take fentanyl seriously, and I'm sorry, I have to comment that, yeah, within the Ottawa media and political bubble, there's been what I see as a lot of ignorance and denialism about, is fentanyl a real concern, from people that have never been out to Vancouver, apparently, and seen the tens of thousands suffering there. But what could and should a fentanyl czar do? I think we agree that Canada needs racketeering power laws where those people that are still walking free from the failed e-pirate investigation, are still traveling down to Mexico, Panama, still meeting with Canadian politicians, with the racketeering law, apparently there would be some consequences.
Yeah. Well, just specifically on that, because you raised it, and it's something I also have to reflect. It is stunning the number of high level actors from transnational criminal organizations, a variety of them, that maintain a presence and various residences in Canada and come and go. Obviously, many of them maintain a rotating international presence, but they're able to operate here seemingly unfettered, and I think that's why we see a number of them choose Canada and spend significant amounts of time here. And they're not here just sightseeing, Sam. When they're here, they're operating their enterprise, which is killing tens of thousands of people. And they seem to do that without a lot of difficulty. So what do we need from a czar? Well, first, I think some of us understand the breadth and depth of what we're up against, but I don't know that that is fully understood by everyone. So I think that needs to be laid very plainly in front of the Canadian people. We need so much more sunlight into all of this. So much of this operates and exists in the shadows. And I will say, the Americans are much more transparent with the public about their activities, about what they're up against, about the actions that they're taking, about investigations, about outcomes of investigations. There's a lot in our country that you never hear the outcome. you might hear that, oh, well, they may say if they have some good news, they may try and share it, but we don't hear a lot and we don't see a lot of the follow through. So I think first, you need to understand the breadth and depth, and that has to be laid very plainly in front of the Canadian people, because we need the support of the Canadian people. And I think we'd have it to do what we need to do once we understand what we're up against. We need to dismantle everything that has allowed this to flourish. I spoke earlier about Secretary Blinken's comments around the support foundations, the support network that allows this to happen on an industrial scale. And we need to go after that with vigor. I think a cross-agency force that is solely focused on this is needed. We need RICO laws. We need a foreign agent registry. We need to significantly overhaul our criminal code and our sentencing. And here's something that we also need. We need a government that's going to have the courage to use the notwithstanding clause and challenge judicial decisions that have swung the justice system far, far in the favor of criminals and people who are engaged in this level of criminality, and decisions that are quite frankly stupid. I think of the BC judge in 2019 who let a fentanyl trafficker off the hook, who was found with over 27,000 fentanyl pills in a compartment in a wheel well in Chilliwack. And that individual was let off because the drug sniffing dog that found the over 27,000 fentanyl pills only partially sat before commencing the search. Because there was a sidewalk in the way. And
I remember.
I'm sorry. That's not the actions of a serious country that is serious about getting this under control. And so when decisions are made that defy all logic and that hamstring our ability to wrestle this to the ground, the government has to make use of the tools it has to challenge them. And if that means that we need to use the notwithstanding clause in certain cases, then that's what has to happen. And so at the end of the day, it's really about, I think, a top to bottom shift in culture and expectations that has to permeate law enforcement, intelligence services, political circles, judicial circles, and our society in general. That's the type of change, and approaching this with a level of seriousness, understanding how high the stakes are. That's what I think is required.
Yeah, I'll comment a little on that story because it got me as upset as it has you. I mean, I remember it was brilliant reporting. That is news reporting. They got a tape of this. I think he was like a 55-year-old semi-retired guy that had just, taken a load out to Alberta, which, by the way, is a powerful node of Sam Gore and the company. And he said to the cop, I'll tell you so much, but I can't tell you more because they'll kill me. He said, they're not like you and me. I think he was indicating something. And my thoughts are, okay, the Charter of Rights was used very well by a criminal defense lawyer, just like it was used very well, in disclosure in the e-pirate case. Just as it's used in every single money laundering defense case, every single organized crime case. So what you're suggesting is how many people died because a dog didn't sit down? And I'm sorry, a useful idiot judge or worse made that type of decision. So here we need some politicians with legal training and a real sense of justice, which is how many people are going to die if I rule this way and let 30,000 pills go and I don't let the RCMP roll up this network, because there's people on the ground in the RCMP that want to do their jobs. People up
Yeah.
higher, the people I talk to who are real cops are starting to have questions of people at the minister level in Ottawa. I'll leave it at that. But I think Canadians should be absolutely outraged. And I've heard something else that I'll tell you. Someone in the East Coast sort of intelligence establishment said, yeah, it's a problem that people, maybe in media or academic or political or business classes don't see the deaths that maybe Donald Trump's or JD Vance's base is a little bit, that is the people that voted for them, who are people like anyone else, see the death around them. You're seeing the deaths in your community. People in Ottawa, maybe they'll start seeing them, but they're not seeing what real politicians in BC have been seeing like you have. So, I guess without getting ranting too much, you need some real politicians with a legal understanding. You're saying that the Charter of Rights has to be carved out if it's being used in those cases where we know this is transnational crime, right?
Absolutely. I mean, when it's being weaponized against us, something has to happen. And you're right. You have to have elected officials who have an understanding of it. The most important thing, I think, is you have to have the courage to see this through. And I don't know that I see that from a lot of the elected leadership in the country, because you can well imagine that much of the Ottawa establishment would just wring their hands and get themselves tied up in knots at the thought that we may have to give some consideration to how the charter is being misused by very sophisticated criminal organizations to unleash carnage in our country. And so what I'm saying to you is, if the alternative to making those adjustments or to have specific carve-outs for people who are engaged in some of the most horrific and deadly crimes possible, if the alternative to doing that is what has been happening, which is to do nothing, to allow bad decisions, to let very bad people face zero consequence and continue, then I think the choice is very clear. And that's going to require a level of courage and backbone. But I think the public is there. I don't think the public is interested in seeing another story like the dog that partially sat because the sidewalk is in the way. And so someone trafficking 30,000 pills of fentanyl gets off. And as you point out, the police are not able to go up the food chain and figure it out. The choice, again, I think cannot be any clearer.
I agree on that. And I also want to be respectful of your time. You have to get on with being the mayor in Port Coquitlam today. So I'll end with this question. A person that could be named, David Asher, a former Trump administration official who was very material to the DEA investigations into the Toronto Dominion money laundering case, and who told me in a story months ago, long before Donald Trump, came out and made, some requirements of Canada, said that the US government is very concerned that command and control for Western Hemisphere money laundering is in Toronto and Vancouver, They learned that in the TD Bank case. I've reported that, after my work and really, COVID shutdowns ramped down activities in BC casinos, that billions and billions and billions and billions of dirty money loop from China into Canada shifted to Toronto and started moving through all our big banks, right? The diaspora community is being used at scale by, as David Asher told me, the United Front Work Department. So David Asher, who is now being interviewed on CBC Power and Politics by Ottawa-type journalists, after my work brought David Asher to the knowledge of the Canadian public, he says, Beijing's United Front is like the network of networks that facilitates transnational money laundering for the organized crime that runs fentanyl into North America. And so fentanyl is just one drug: methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, sex trafficking, human trafficking, the United Front, corruption of politicians, election interference funding. This is what I'm saying. Does it make sense to you? Because look, you've been the target of the United Front. I reported that story.
Yeah, all of these things are not happening by accident and in isolation. All of my work on this issue, my conversations with people who are privy to far more information and details and knowledge than I am, everything that I have gleaned and learned in the 8 years that I have been trying to move the needle on this issue leads me to that conclusion. This is connected, it's coordinated, it's not by accident. And as Secretary Blinken himself said, it is serving many agendas and several aims. The Chinese Communist Party, I think, sits atop of this pyramid, and we know what their goals are because they're very upfront about it. You need to listen only to any speech almost by Xi Jinping. Their goal is dominance. They have been able to build a relationship with the triads, with a lot of overlap, by the way, between officials within the CCP and the triads, and the cartels of Mexico and South America, who may not share their political objectives, but who certainly see their agenda, which is primarily money and power, also being served through that relationship. And so you need to understand that, I think, singular fact that all of this, from money laundering to fentanyl, other drug trafficking, foreign interference, all of it serves a purpose for these folks. And unless we are willing to stand up and be counted, take some risks, show some courage, then I really fear what the future holds for Canada. And that is the magnitude of what we're dealing with.
I agree. And so I'll let you go, but a thought occurs to me. I know the goal is not to be partisan at all today, but if I had to ask you what report card you would give to Premier David Eby so far in managing the fentanyl crisis and in responding to the US government's position on it, could you comment on that?
Well, I am really concerned with the trajectory that British Columbia has gone. I think the the response to this obviously has been to pursue a slew of quote harm reduction, so-called harm reduction measures, and it's disappointing to see the BC NDP government repeat what they were so critical of when the former BC Liberal government did some of the same things. And by that, I mean when evidence emerged that so-called safe supply of government provided fentanyl was being diverted into the hands of criminal organizations and used for drug trafficking, the government did what it seems all governments do: deny. No, it's not. You have no evidence. Okay, maybe a little bit, but statistically insignificant. How dare you suggest that? How dare you further stigma? Have you no compassion? Oh, okay, maybe it's happening more than we thought. Okay, yeah, it's a problem. Okay, now we're going to deal with it. So that, unfortunately, is a very well-traveled road for governments of all stripes. It seems as though the provincial government in British Columbia is trying to execute a pivot, and I hope they do. It's necessary, because while I understand that there are some well-meaning and well-intentioned people who have advocated for the direction that the government has gone, I think it is not helped. It hasn't got us closer to a solution. And in many respects, it has played into the hands of these transnational criminal organizations in terms of the ease in which they're able to engage in their criminal activities. And I've heard that directly from police officers. When possession of fentanyl is decriminalized and police no longer have the ability to follow the money, so to speak, it just further challenges what is already almost an impossible maze that they currently have to deal with. So I'm very hopeful that we see a significant shift in approach.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Mayor West. And this podcast will go up as soon as possible today, Thursday, February 13th, because this should be and will be watched by leaders in Washington, I hope in Ottawa, and around the world. This is the issue right now in Canada. And I think, as you and I agree, this should be about people deaths. This is not about trying to avoid, in my view, tariffs come and go, trade wars will come and go, but people are dying. I believe that this is why it matters.
That is exactly why it matters. And again, I can't emphasize enough, regardless of the interplay in any sort of current geopolitical dispute, this matters to us. This matters to our country. This matters to our future. This matters to our people. This matters to families who have lost loved ones. That's why we should be doing it. And we should have done it a hell of a long time ago. But now is better than never. And that is exactly why this matters.
Great. Okay. Well, stick around for a few seconds while your tape uploads. And thanks. We'll have to do this again. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.